Everything you were taught about how civilization began may be wrong. The story goes like this. First, humans learned to farm. Farming gave us surplus and settlement and cities, and only then, with time and wealth to spare, did we build temples and carve gods into stone. First, the field, then the faith. But on a hill in southern Turkey, that order is reversed. 11,500 years ago, before farming, before pottery, before writing, before the wheel, people who owned almost nothing hauled tons of carved stone up a barren ridge and raised a ring of giant pillars. Then, after centuries, they buried it with their own hands. We are still standing on that hill, asking why. Its name is Göbekli Tepe. In Turkish, it means Potbelly Hill. For decades, no one thought it was anything at all. In 1963, a survey team walked the ridge near the city of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey, noted some broken limestone slabs poking from the soil, and decided they were the remains of a medieval cemetery. They moved on. Years later, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came to the same hill. He looked at the same broken stone and saw something no one had let themselves see. These were not medieval gravestones. They were the tops of massive carved pillars, and they were old, almost impossibly old. Schmidt began to dig in 1995. What he uncovered would unsettle the study of human history for the next 30 years. Beneath the hill lay great rings of stone, circular and oval enclosures, each ringed by towering T-shaped pillars of limestone, some more than 5 meters tall, some weighing as much as 16 tons. At the center of each ring stood 2 even larger pillars facing each other. Then there was the dating. When the radiocarbon results came back, they pointed to a date around 9,600 years before the Common Era, roughly 11,500 years ago. To understand what that number means, hold it against the monuments we think of as ancient. Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by about 6,000 years. It is older than the Great Pyramid of Giza by about 7,000. The first written words in ancient Sumer would not be pressed into clay for another 5,000 years after these pillars were raised. This was not the oldest temple by a little. It was the oldest monumental architecture we had ever found by an enormous margin. And the people who built it had no farms, no pottery, no metal, no writing, no wheel, no kings, as far as we can tell, and no cities to rule. They were hunter-gatherers. For 100 years, the textbooks had agreed that people like that mobile, foraging, living off the wild, did not build monuments. They could not. Monuments required surplus. and surplus required agriculture, and agriculture was supposed to come first. Göbekli Tepe sat in the ground for 11,000 years, quietly disagreeing. Because almost everything we thought had to come first, farming, settlement, surplus, came after this hill was already sacred. To feel the weight of Göbekli Tepe, you have to stand in the world that built it. It was the dawn of the Neolithic, around 9,600 BCE. The last ice age had only recently loosened its grip. Across the hills of what is now southeastern Turkey, people lived as our species had lived for hundreds of thousands of years by hunting and gathering. They followed the gazelle herds. They harvested wild grasses, wild nuts, wild fruit. They knew every spring and every season of their landscape. They had no permanent towns. They had no written language to leave us a single word of explanation. What they did have was each other, and it turns out, an idea worth carrying tons of stone for. We tend to picture pre-agricultural people as living hand to mouth, too busy surviving to dream. Göbekli Tepe demolishes that picture, raising a single one of these pillars, quarrying it from the bedrock, shaping it, moving it, standing it upright would have taken many people working together for a long time. Building an entire enclosure would have taken hundreds. These were people without bosses, without bureaucracies, without the machinery of a state, and yet they organized labor on a monumental scale, fed the workers, and returned to the project across generations. How do we know they were fed? Because the ground around the enclosures is thick with the butchered bones of wild game gazelle, aurochs in quantities that speak of enormous gatherings, feasts. People came to this hill in numbers, ate together, and worked together on something none of them strictly needed. The scale of those gatherings is hard to overstate. The bones suggest not a family meal, but a crowd people drawn from across the region, perhaps timed to the seasons when the herds pass through. There are even hints of large vessels and fermentation, raising the possibility that some of the earliest brewing in the world happened here to fuel the work. Whatever drew them, they came in numbers, and they came again for generations. That is the quiet revolution buried under Göbekli Tepe, not the stone, the cooperation. Because to gather hundreds of foragers in one place, to feed them, to coordinate them toward a shared vision that would outlast any single person that requires something we do not usually credit to the Stone Age. It requires shared belief, a reason to come together that is bigger than the next meal. And consider what that asked of them as people. To build here, a forager had to trust that others would come, that the work begun by one generation would be carried on by the next, that the effort was worth it for something no one would ever eat or trade. That is not just engineering. That is the birth of a shared identity, the sense of a we larger than the band you were born into. These were not simple people in a simple world. They were us, with all of our hunger for meaning, just standing at the very beginning. And before they had sown a single field, they had already decided that some things were worth building that you could not eat. So what exactly did they raise on that hill? Picture a great ring of standing stones set into a low wall. Around the inside of the ring stand the T-shaped pillars, like figures gathered shoulder to shoulder. And in the very center, two more pillars, taller than the rest, stand facing one another. Look closer at those central stones, and the strangeness deepens because they are not abstract. They have arms, carved in low relief down their sides. Two arms reach around to the front, where long-fingered hands meet above a belt. Some wear a carved loincloth. A few have what may be a necklace or a fox pelt at the hip. These pillars are not columns. They are beings. 11,500 years ago, someone carved figures as tall as a house, gave them hands and belts, and stood them in a circle facing each other and facing us. They are, as far as we know, among the oldest monumental images of human-like beings anywhere on Earth. And they are not alone on the stone. Across the pillars and walls crawls a bestiary of carved animals: foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, wild cattle, cranes. Not the gentle livestock of a farming world. These are the wild, the dangerous, the powerful. Whatever these images meant, they meant it intensely. Now remember how it was made. There were no metal tools. The pillars were cut from the limestone bedrock with stone tools, then shaped, then moved across the hill, without wheels, without draft animals, and raised upright into prepared sockets. In the quarry nearby, you can still see one unfinished pillar, never freed from the rock, lying where the work stopped. Every step of that was done by people using their hands, their bodies, ropes, levers, and one another. We are not certain exactly how. The honest answer is that the engineering is still being reconstructed. But we are certain that it was done by hunter-gatherers, organizing themselves on a scale we did not believe was possible before farming. For a century, the story of civilization had a fixed order. First survival, then surplus, then the sacred. But here the sacred came first. People built the temple before they built the farm, and that single fact turned the story of how we became civilized upside down. So what was Göbekli Tepe for? The archaeologist who uncovered it, Klaus Schmidt, had a bold answer. He believed it was a sanctuary, a sacred gathering place, a cathedral on a hill where scattered bands of hunter-gatherers came together to build, to feast, and to worship. People did not live here, he argued. They made pilgrimage here. First the temple, he said, then the city. It was a beautiful idea, and it made Göbekli Tepe famous. But science does not stand still, and the hill has kept talking. Because as the excavations continued, and they continue today, the team began to find things that a pure temple should not have. Hearths and fire installations, the remains of everyday meals, cut into the rock, basins that appear to be cisterns for collecting rainwater enough, perhaps, to let people stay for long stretches, and traces of ordinary domestic buildings. In other words, people may not have only worshipped here, they may have lived here. Those rock-cut basins matter more than they sound. If they really did catch and hold rainwater, then people could have stayed on this dry ridge for long stretches, which means the hill was not only visited but inhabited. At the hearths, the everyday meals, the ordinary buildings, and the image of a remote pilgrimage shrine gives way to something more like a living place that was also profoundly sacred. Today, most researchers no longer force the choice. Göbekli Tepe looks less like a lonely temple in the wilderness and more like something richer and stranger. A place that was both sacred and lived in, where the line we like to draw between settlement and sanctuary may not have existed at all. The team digging there now is far more cautious than the headlines. Most of the mound has never been touched, and every season reshapes the story. And what did any of it mean? The folded hands, the belts, the snarl of carved foxes and vultures we genuinely do not know. Were the central pillars ancestors? Gods? The honored dead? Every reading is a guess. The people who could have told us left no writing, only the stones staring out across 11,000 years. And there is one more idea, the boldest of them. Göbekli Tepe sits in the very region where wild wheat was first domesticated. Some researchers wonder whether the cause and effect we always assumed runs backwards. That the need to feed these great gatherings to reliably feed hundreds of people returning to the hill may have been part of what pushed people toward farming in the first place. That the temple in a sense helped invent the field. It is a hypothesis, not a verdict, but it is a profound one. Now let's clear away the noise. You will hear that Göbekli Tepe was built by aliens or by survivors of some lost super civilization. It was not. There is no mystery about who built it. It was built by the hunter-gatherers who lived in these hills, whose tools, bones, and homes are all around it. The real mystery is not who. It is how a people without farms or writing did something this ambitious and why. And that mystery is far more interesting than any fantasy, because Göbekli Tepe is not alone. In the years since Klaus Schmidt first dug here, archaeologists have found more enclosures across the hill and more sites beyond it. Göbekli Tepe turns out to be one of many. Across the surrounding region, a landscape archaeologists now call the Stone Hills, lie a whole family of related sites. At one of them, Karahan Tepe, excavators have uncovered its own monumental pillars, its own carved chamber, and a human face emerging from the living rock. This was not a single miracle on a single hill. It was a culture. A whole world of monument builders. 11,000 years ago, before the first farm. And then, slowly, that world wound down. Over many centuries, the great enclosures of Göbekli Tepe fell out of use. The towering early pillars gave way, over time, to smaller and simpler ones. The ambition that raised the first rings was not sustained forever, and at some point, the enclosures were filled in, buried under rubble and earth, until the giant stones were hidden completely. And the hill became just a hill. Why? We don't know. Some believe the burial was deliberate, a kind of ritual closing, the community laying its sacred place to rest, the way you might bury one of your own. Others think the infill built up more gradually from slope wash and the debris of generations. The truth may be some of both, and the honest answer is that the reason is lost. But sit with the strangeness of it. A people built the most ambitious thing in their world. Figures of stone tall as houses, raised by hundreds of hands across generations. And then, with the same hands, they covered it over and walked away. And because they did, it survived. Buried and waiting for 11,000 years. There is a reason Göbekli Tepe unsettles us, and it is not really about stone. For as long as we have told the story of civilization, we have told it as a story about stuff. We learned to grow food. Food made surplus. Surplus made cities, and priests, and kings, and temples. Material first, meaning second. Gobekli Tepe suggests we may have had it backwards. That before we tamed a single seed, we were already gathering by the hundred to build something holy. That the thing which pulled us out of 1,000,000 years of foraging and into the world we live in now may not have been hunger. It may have been the need to come together and to believe. And there is so much we still cannot say. We do not know what the figures with the folded hands were meant to be. Ancestors, gods, guardians, the dead. We have guesses, and only guesses. We do not know what was said or sung in those enclosures, or who was allowed inside, or what the carved foxes and vultures meant to the people who lived among them. We do not know for certain why they buried it. And most of the hill has never been excavated at all. The majority of Göbekli Tepe is still down there, unread. The story is not finished. It is barely begun. We do not know their names, or their gods, or the words they sang on this hill. We know only that 11,500 years ago, when there were no cities, no kings, no writing, and no fields, people came together and raised something none of them needed to survive. And then, after centuries, they buried it with their own hands. We are still standing on the hill, asking why. It is worth remembering. next time we imagine that the people of the deep past were less than us, that the oldest monument we have ever found was not a tomb for a king or a wall for a city. It was a place to gather. They reached for meaning before they reached for comfort, which may be the most human thing anyone has ever done. And the hill is still talking. Every season, the excavations turn up a little more. A new enclosure, a new carving, a new sister site across the stone hills. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe could not have known they were sending a message to us, but they were. The message is this: we were reaching for something bigger than ourselves from the very beginning. If Forgotten Worlds and Ancient Mysteries find you, subscribe and stay close. There are more of them. The first thing we ever built together, we built to look up. This was Echoes of Earth. The rest is still buried.